Okay, picture this scene for a second, because if I pitch this as a movie script, you'd laugh me out of the room.
Right.
It's 1933. The Great Depression is at its absolute worst.
Hmm.
I mean, people are starving, banks are just gone, and there's this feeling that the American experiment might actually be over.
A very real feeling. Yeah.
And into the middle of all this chaos, a man walks into a congressional hearing room. And he's not just any man. He is Major General Smedley Butler. This guy had 2 Medals of Honor.
He was basically the most decorated Marine in history at that point, a national hero.
In every sense of the word. And he sits down under oath and tells Congress that he has been approached by a cabal of Wall Street bankers to lead a military coup against the President of the United States.
A coup against FDR.
And the plan wasn't, subtle. They wanted him to raise an army of 500,000 angry veterans.
500,000 men.
500,000, yeah. March on Washington, seize the White House, and install him as a dictator. They even had a title for him.
Oh, this is the best part.
Secretary of General Affairs, which sounds like the most boring dystopian job ever. They were just going to claim FDR's health was failing and take over.
And that's what we now know as the business plot. And look, it sounds like pure fiction, but the congressional committee that looked into it, they concluded that the plan was real, it was discussed, and if the backers had pulled the trigger, it was probably doable.
But we're not just here to talk about one failed coup from the 30s. We're using Smedley Butler as the way in. We've got a huge stack of research here, from the original testimony to Richard Hofstadter's work and modern handbooks on conspiracy theories. We are diving deep into the history of the paranoid style.
And the goal here, I think, is to kind of reframe how you think about conspiracy theories. We tend to dismiss them, right? Tinfoil hats, dark basements. Exactly. But what the sources suggest is something a little uncomfortable, which is that conspiracy thinking isn't an anomaly in American history. It's more like the operating system. From the Puritans to the Founding Fathers, all the way up to the modern deep state, paranoia has been this primary engine for political action.
So let's go back to that hotel room in Newark, because the way this coup was supposedly pitched to Butler, it's just wild. It wasn't some shadowy mastermind in a volcano lair. It was a bond salesman.
Gerald C. McGuire, and this is where it gets gritty. McGuire was a $100 a week bond salesman, which, look, it was a good living in the Depression, but he was clearly acting as a frontman for some very wealthy people. People terrified that FDR taking the country off the gold standard was going to just wipe them out.
So he starts courting Butler, visiting him in hotels, showing up in his house.
And he's not just talking. There's this one scene where McGuire is just tossing money around.
Right. He pulls out a huge roll of cash.
A roll of $18,000 bills. In 1933 money, that's a fortune. He's just showing it to Butler to prove he's serious. He says they have $3 million ready to go, $300 million in the wings. But the most chilling part, it's where McGuire got the blueprint for this army.
He didn't just make it up.
No, he'd gone on a research trip.
A research trip to Europe to study how to overthrow a government.
Specifically, to study fascist veteran organizations. He spent time in France looking at the Croix de Feu, the Cross of Fire. It was this paramilitary league of veterans with immense political power. McGuire came back and basically told Butler, that's what we need here.
And he knew the veterans were angry. The bonus army had already marched on Washington.
He figured if you put a beloved hero like Butler in front of them, you could weaponize that economic rage, turn it into a private army.
The logic is just terrifyingly sound. You take desperate men, give them a hero, and point them at the White House. But Smedley Butler was the wrong guy to ask.
Well, he was a patriot, but he was also complicated. He'd famously called himself a racketeer for capitalism, a high-class muscle man for big business in Central America.
So the plotters saw that on his resume and thought, he's a mercenary, he'll do it.
They completely misread him. They didn't realize that his disillusionment with war had made him fiercely loyal to the democratic process, not the bankers. So he played along, got the names, and then he blew the whistle.
So what was the reaction? I'm assuming the media treated this with the gravity of, a treason trial.
You'd think so, but hardly. The New York Times ran a headline calling it a gigantic hoax. They called his testimony a bald and unconvincing narrative. He was mocked.
Wow.
It was only later, when the McCormack-Dickstein Committee released their final report, that the story changed. The report said, and I'm quoting, there was no question. The plot was discussed and planned.
But, and this is the part that always gets me, nobody went to jail. McGuire wasn't prosecuted. The powerful families he named were never even brought in.
And that's the pattern, isn't it? The committee basically said, well, we exposed it, so the danger's over. But a lot of historians argue that the lack of prosecution just shows how tight the political and financial elites were. It shows that this paranoia, this fear of socialism, was so strong among the wealthy that they could rationalize treason as some kind of patriotism.
That idea, economic anxiety driving elite paranoia, that's a powerful theme.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to bridge this to something else. The business plot is about a plot that failed. But the sources make this fascinating turn here. They argue the American obsession with conspiracy really fractures when the worst-case scenario actually happens.
When the president is actually killed.
Exactly. Lincoln, we all learn the story. John Wilkes Booth, Ford's Theater, the barn in Virginia. Booth dies. The end. But the sources dive into this psychology of the impossible. Turns out a huge number of people just refuse to believe Booth was dead.
It creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. There's this persistent myth that the man killed in that barn wasn't Booth. It was a lookalike.
A patsy.
A patsy, yeah. Maybe a guy named J.W. Boyd. The theory was that the government, maybe the War Department, needed to silence Booth so he wouldn't reveal that high-ranking officials were in on it. So they kill a nobody and let the real Booth escape.
And it gets so bizarrely specific. There's the story of John St. Hillen, a bartender in Texas, who, years later, supposedly confessed on his deathbed that he was Booth.
He thought it was his deathbed. He recovered, fled, and later commits suicide in Oklahoma.
And this is the part I just can't get over. His body was embalmed, and it toured the country.
For decades, it was a sideshow attraction, a carnival attraction. You'd pay a nickel or whatever to see the mummy of the man who killed Lincoln.
That is just, it's grotesque. But why? Why would people pay to see a corpse and buy into this story when the eyewitness evidence of Booth's death was overwhelming?
Well, one of the sources we looked at calls it parricide. In the American psyche, the president is this all-powerful father figure. So psychologically, it is incredibly unsatisfying to believe that a lone, mentally unbalanced assassin, a nobody really, can just walk up and eliminate the most powerful person on Earth.
It feels wrong. Like the scales don't balance.
It feels meaningless. That's the key. If nobody can kill the president, then history is just random and chaotic. But if the president is killed by a massive conspiracy, if it involves the vice president, the secretary of war, international bankers, the Jesuits...
But they'd have weight.
It balances the scales. A grand effect demands a grand cause.
That explains so much about JFK, about MLK. We need the villain to be as big as the hero. Which brings us right to Richard Hofstadter. He wrote The Paranoid Style in American Politics back in the 60s, and he argues this isn't just about grief, it's a specific worldview.
Hofstadter is really the gold standard here. And we have to be clear, when he says paranoid, he's not making a clinical diagnosis. He's describing a political style used by more or less normal people. But it has rules. To the paranoid stylist, history is a conspiracy. The world is a battle between absolute good and absolute evil.
And the enemy is never just some guy with a different political opinion. The enemy is, well, he's practically a demigod.
He's omnipresent. He controls the press, the schools, the banks, everything. The sources list these examples from early American history that are just baffling to us now, like the anti-Masonic movement in the 1820s.
I knew they were a target, but the details in here.
Yeah.
Masons had a separate legal system?
They believed Masons were a secret state within a state. There are these widely circulated stories that Masons drank wine from human skulls in their rituals. And this wasn't some fringe idea. It was a major political movement that got people elected. Or look at the anti-Catholic paranoia.
Right.
There was a genuine belief that Jesuits were infiltrating America to hand the country over to the Pope.
And the disguises. The source says they were disguised as puppet showmen and dancing masters.
Can you imagine? You're at a dance lesson, wondering if your instructor is a secret Vatican agent. But Hofstadter points out something crucial. These early conspiracy theorists, the anti-Masons, the anti-Catholics, they felt they were the owners of America. They were defending the established way of life.
They were inside the fort trying to keep intruders out.
Exactly. But that changes. Hofstadter argues that after World War II, the modern conspiracy theorist feels dispossessed. They feel the country has already been taken from them by treasonous elites. They aren't defending the fort anymore. They're trying to storm it.
That feeling of dispossession, that seems to fuel everything today. But here's the biggest curveball in the research for me. We assume conspiracy theorist is an insult. But Michael Butter's research argues that for most of history, it wasn't a fringe idea at all. It was orthodox knowledge.
This is the hardest thing for us to wrap our heads around, I think. We are trained to see conspiracy theories as bad